Hi everyone. On next week's concert, we are featuring Tchaikovsky's Fourth Symphony. A lot has been written about this symphony, and particularly an excess of speculation about psychological motives and terrible traumas that Tchaikovsky was going through at the time, some of which may be true, but a lot of it, I think, is overblown. I'd rather talk a little bit about the context of the music and a particular element that Tchaikovsky uses to help bind the piece together. Now, at this period of time in Russia, there was a very large conversation taking place, and actually more than a conversation, it was really an argument about staying true to authentic Russian tradition versus being influenced by the West, which really meant Germany at that point. And in the field of music, the idea of maintaining Russian folk melodies and dances as the heart and soul of Russian music was very important to people like Glinka and Balakirev. Tchaikovsky didn't disagree, but he also was very much involved in the idea of using Western forms, and particularly when it came to his symphonies, creating a four-movement structure that had a sense of unity about it. One of the models for his Fourth Symphony was actually the Beethoven Fifth Symphony, which was one of the first symphonies that did give us a sense of flow from the very dramatic fate motif at the beginning to the glorious celebratory ending. And that's very much like the shape of Tchaikovsky's Fourth. That fate motif that comes at the beginning is really part of this actual symphony. In fact, he wrote that the opening fanfare is exactly that, this idea of fate. At the end of the introduction, shortly after that opening fanfare, we hear the clarinet and the bassoon playing really just two notes. This very simple descending half step, which then actually becomes the main melody of the first movement. Now, before we hear that in the orchestra, I want to talk about these two half steps, because they're the important binding element that Tchaikovsky uses, beyond the fate motif, which a lot of people talk about. These two notes, this descending half step, for centuries had been a kind of musical shorthand for lacrima, or Latin for tears. And so when composers wanted to create a sense of sadness or reflection, they would use these two notes. So we actually hear it in this first example by Johann Sebastian Bach, his very famous melody, Komm süßer Tod, in which he actually gives us that falling half step. We actually hear it twice. And he heightens it by actually rising a little higher. Another very famous example is Mozart's Requiem, the Lacrimosa movement, as it's so entitled. The end of that phrase has those same two notes. So let's go back to Tchaikovsky. The clarinets and bassoons give us, and then the violins and cellos take over. To begin the second movement, Tchaikovsky transforms these same notes but he changes them just slightly and gives them a new color now by giving it to the oboe. It's this gorgeous oboe solo that begins the second movement. As Tchaikovsky makes the progression from the very dramatic fate motif of that first movement to really what is a joyous celebration, in fact, he even includes a Russian folk song in the fourth movement of the piece, we come to the third movement, where Tchaikovsky did something quite daring. He had the strings play through the entire movement, only pizzicato, plucking their strings. And they start with these same notes. So we hear again those same half steps, but again, this idea of the fourth, which we actually heard that fourth, a slightly larger interval, and in the oboe solo. This time a little bit different to give it poignancy, that idea of the interval. Here, we get it there. And those very same notes give us the brilliant and virtuosic opening to the fourth movement. So to sum up, without getting stuck in all of the verbiage that gets expended on this piece of music and Tchaikovsky's tumultuous life, it's fair to say he was a very emotional guy, and that emotion came out in his music. I think we can go overboard sometimes in ascribing deeper psychological motives to every single note of certain compositions. But I think it is the notes that are so important, and especially the very poignant and sincere way that Tchaikovsky used this very simple idea of lacrima and its transformation to joyousness to give us the framework for this wonderful celebration. In Tchaikovsky's own words, the introduction is the kernel of the whole symphony, unquestionably its main idea. This is fate, the force of destiny. How Tchaikovsky took that opening fate fanfare, and then those simple two notes, that's what's so poignant to me. The transformation of this unbelievably simple human gesture, the act of the tear, and watching it transform over the entire symphony in Tchaikovsky's imagination. We look forward to performing this piece for you and hope that you'll all be able to join us.